Hello children, let me welcome you to the virtual class of the Brihan Mumbai Mahanagar Palika. My name is Shraddha teacher. Children, we are in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic, and because of that we are not able to go to school, but that doesn't mean we are going to stop learning. So we are going to do many lessons which are very interesting from your textbook through the virtual class here. So let us do a lesson in English today. Come on children, let's start with a new lesson in standard 8th, and we are going to do a lesson in scholarship today for the subject English. And children, we are going to start with a new unit today in scholarship English. That is, we will start with a unit, with a lesson in the unit grammar today. So we have been talking about language study, we have been talking about various other points also in English, isn't it? We talked about synonyms in the beginning, which was part of vocabulary. Then under vocabulary, we also learnt about antonyms, we learnt about formation of words, phrases, abbreviations, etc. When we came to unit 2, we did word puzzles and riddles, where we did a number of crossword puzzles, riddles, word ladders, word web, word register. Okay, we talked about various ways in which you can learn English using word puzzles and word games. Then in part 3, we learnt about language study. That is, we talked about parts of speech, tenses, modal auxiliaries, clauses, synthesis, figures of speech, etc. Now we will start with the 4th unit in your scholarship textbook. That is, we will be doing grammar today. And under the, you can say, grammar part, we will be learning about various topics like voice, direct and indirect speech, degrees of comparison, transformation of sentences, compound conjunctions, WH questions, etc. But today will be the first lesson in your unit of grammar, and today we are going to look at the point voice. That is, we are going to understand what the meaning of voices in grammar is, and what is active voice and what is passive voice, how are they different from each other, and what are the different ways in which you can write a sentence using active voice and passive voice. Okay, so this is a very, very important part of language learning, understanding voice. Now remember, we usually use active voice when we speak, all right, or when we write. So active voice is used to a larger extent, and passive voice is not that much in use, but then we still have to learn and understand what the meaning of passive voice is also. So we will understand the meanings, we will take a look at the paper patterns or the question patterns, and we will try and solve a number of examples based on this particular topic. So come on, let's start by understanding that voice, mood, tense, person, and number. These are the 5 qualities of verbs in English language. So now, what does it mean? Voice, of course, we will learn today. We are going to understand what the meaning of voice is. Now, what about mood in grammar? What is the meaning of mood in grammar? Mood doesn't always mean feelings. Okay, sometimes we say, I'm not in a mood to study today. That means I do not feel like studying today. So mood is a feeling most of the times. But here in English grammar, mood doesn't always mean feeling. Now mood refers to the quality or form of a verb in the sentence. It sometimes also talks about, or it sometimes also tries to tell you the tone of a verb. Alright, now tone of a verb means the intention of the writer or the speaker. So there are various moods, basic verb moods like imperative, indicative, etc. We are not going to take a look at all of them. Just understand that voice that we are going to learn very soon, mood, tense, person, and number. These are the 5 qualities of verbs in English language or in English grammar. So when we are talking about voice here in this particular lesson, we are talking about verbs. Okay, so remember that. And then what are tenses? What is the meaning of tense? You must all be knowing what a tense. Tense is nothing but it indicates when a verb happens. So tenses are of 3 types. We know past, present and future. Okay, we have learned a lot about tenses, and we also know that when we talk about present tense, you have the present perfect tense, you have the present continuous tense, etc. Okay, now we come to the person in verb. So what is the meaning of person as far as verb is concerned? So what is person? Person means the agreement between the subject and the verb. Okay, so the verb has to agree with the subject in both person as well as in number. Now, the person, it could be number, could be singular or plural, and the person could be first person, second person, or third person. Alright, so we already know what first person in English is. When I say I, it is first person. So all these are very, very closely related to verbs. So we are talking about the 5 important qualities of verb, and we are going to pick up one quality today in particular, and that is voice. We will discuss what the meaning of voice in English grammar is. Okay, so now I need not tell you that voice is directly related to verbs. It is a concept which is very, very closely related to verbs. Okay, so come on, let's try and see what the meaning of voice in English grammar is. So let's start by understanding that in grammar, the voice of a verb describes the relationship between the action or the state. You know, the verbs are action verbs as well as state verbs. So it describes the relationship between the action that the verb expresses and the participants. Okay, now who are the participants? The subject and the object. They could be the participant. So in a way, we can say that voice describes the relationship between the action and the subject object in a sentence. Alright, so that is the meaning of voice. Now, we can also say that voice is a form of a verb that is used to show whether the subject is given more emphasis or the action done by the subject is given more emphasis. Emphasis means importance. So according to the voice of the sentence, you will be able to understand whether the subject is being shown as important or whether the action which is done by the subject is being shown as important. Okay, don't get confused at this point. When we look at examples, you will understand better. Finally, you can say that voice is the term used to describe whether a verb is active or is it passive. So voices can be of two types. It can be active voice when the verb is active, or passive voice when the verb is passive. Now what is the meaning of this active and passive voice? This is what we are learning in this lesson. So come on, let's understand that. When we talk about voice in English, we have the active voice and we have the passive voice. Okay, coming to active and passive voice, to understand it in one single sentence, you can say that active voice talks about what the subject does. So, subject is given a little importance here. We are talking about the subject and then we are focusing on the action. Whereas in passive voice, the focus is not on the subject, but it is on the action which is done by the subject. Okay, when we see examples, you will understand better. So after having understood this, that in active voice, the subject is important, and in passive voice, the action is important. Now let us pick up the active voice first and try to understand in detail about what active voice is, and we will look at certain examples also. So the active voice asserts means it tells you that the person or thing represented by the grammatical subject performs the action represented by the verb. So it is trying to tell you that when the voice is active, then the sentence tells us that the subject is performing the action. Okay, so the subject is important here. The action is secondary. Now, it follows a clear subject, verb, object construct that's easy to understand. So now a sentence usually is constructed like this. SVO pattern we say. Subject, verb, object pattern. So now the sentences in active voice, they follow the clear-cut subject, verb, object construction. That is why you remember I told you that most of the sentences that we use are in the active voice. Passive voice is not used that much in daily life. Okay? We can also say that when the subject does or acts upon the verb in sentences, then the sentences are said to be in the active voice. So here which is the all important factor in the sentence? It is the subject. When the sentence is in active voice, the subject is the most important part of the sentence. Okay? Or it gets maximum importance in a sentence. So that is active voice. Let us take a look at some examples. So let us see some examples of sentences which are in the active voice. So Grandpa planted a rose tree in our garden. So who planted? Grandpa planted. So Grandpa is important here. The subject, Grandpa, is important here. Newton discovered gravity. Who discovered gravity? Newton discovered. She was making a clay doll. Rajat builds houses. He had watched a movie. I have planted 2 trees. So see, all of them, they are following the pattern of subject, verb, object. Grandpa, subject. What did he do? He planted. What? A rose tree. Newton, subject. Discovered, verb. What? Gravity, which is the object. She, subject. What was she doing? She was making. So was making is the verb. What was she making? A clay doll, which is the object. Rajat, subject. Builds, verb. Houses, object. Okay, so these are all examples of sentences in the active voice, and we are all seeing how each of these sentences is beginning with the subject. Okay, now as against this, let us try and understand what is passive voice. So passive is the opposite of active, isn't it? So what is passive voice? A verb is in the passive voice when the subject of the sentence is acted on by the verb. So now the verb is doing the work of focusing or bringing the subject into focus. So here the subject is not all important. So what is more important? It is the verb. Okay, so verb in the passive voice is when the subject of the sentence is acted on by the verb. We can also say that the passive voice is used when we want to emphasize the action and the object of a sentence rather than the subject. So when we want to emphasize the action and we do not want to emphasize the subject. For example, if I say the vase is broken, so I want to tell you that that particular vase, or you can say anything, you can say the object, the cup. I want to emphasize or point out that the cup is broken. I do not want to say who broke the cup. That is not important for me here. So I want to emphasize the action or the verb rather than the subject. Who did it is not important. It is done is more important. Okay, so this is the meaning of passive voice. Now let us try and see some example sentences in passive voice, and we will take the same examples that we took in active voice so you understand the difference. Now see, remember, Their grandpa came first. But here we have the rose tree which is coming first. So a rose tree in our garden was planted by grandpa. So we are not saying grandpa planted the rose tree in our garden. We are taking it in the reverse order. We are saying the rose tree in our garden was planted by grandpa. Next, gravity was discovered by Newton. We are not saying Newton discovered gravity. We are saying gravity was discovered by Newton. A clay doll was being made by her. Instead of saying she was making the clay doll, we are saying a clay doll was being made by her. So the object comes first and the subject goes behind. Houses are built by Rajat. So you can say the use of the word by here. Okay, keep that in your mind. Then a movie had been watched by him. So these are all examples of sentences in passive voice. The same sentences we have seen them in active voice just a few minutes ago. Now children, this is the last one. 2 trees have been planted by me. Instead of saying I planted 2 trees, see the focus was on I. But here the focus is on the trees. 2 trees have been planted. By whom? By me. So that is not important. Even if I don't say me, it is okay. The important thing here in the sentence is that the 2 trees have been planted. This much work has been done. Okay? So these are all examples of sentences in passive voice. Now there are certain rules for changing the active voice to passive voice. There are 5 rules here for us to understand. So let us take a look at all the rules along with certain examples of each rule. We have 5 rules. Rule number 1 says, voice change can only happen when a sentence contains a transitive or an action verb. When there is an action verb in the sentence, then the change of voice can take place. For example, look at this example. Rabi paints realistic portraits. So Rabi is actually doing some work of painting. So Rabi paints is in the active voice. I will change it and I will say realistic portraits are painted by Rabi. So you see the subject has gone behind and the object has become more important. What is the object? Realistic portraits are painted by Rabi. Let's take one more example to emphasize this point. Trisha is working on the project is the active voice. The project is being worked on by Trisha. So even if I don't say by Trisha, the sentence is still right because the focus is on the action rather than on who did the action. That is rather than on the subject. Okay, so this was rule number 1. It can happen when there is a transitive verb or an action verb. Coming to rule number 2. The subject and the object of the sentence change places. This we have already seen now. Grandpa went behind and the tree came in front. Okay, Newton went behind and gravity came ahead. So the subject and the object of the sentence, they tend to swap places. They tend to change places with each other. Subject is replaced by object in the passive voice and subject is placed in the place of the object. So they swap places. Swap means they exchange places. In active voice, the subject is first and the object comes later. And in the passive voice, the object comes first and the subject goes later. Example, Rupa teaches maths to children. See how I have changed it? Maths is taught to children by Rupa. Okay, so the subject Rupa and the object maths have changed places here. One more example, mother scolded him. He was scolded by mother. Mother and him, they change places. And of course, him has become he. So that is also one rule which we learn about very soon. Here comes rule number 3, which we were just talking about. He became him. So personal pronouns, I, me, he, she, personal pronouns change while converting a sentence from active to passive voice. Personal pronouns, they undergo a change. Let's look at some examples to understand better. I gave him the book. So see, I. See how this I will change in the answer. The book was given to him by me. So the I has become me. So the personal pronoun has changed. One more example. He was organizing the program. So he has become him here in the answer. See, in the passive voice. The program was being organized by him. Okay, so you can see how they have swapped places. Coming to the second last rule, that is rule number 4. Each tense has their specific rule for changing active to passive voice. Each tense, it has got its own particular rule. The main verb of a sentence of all tenses has to be in the past participle form in passive voice. Even though each tense has its own specific rule, but remember that the main verb is always in the past participle form in the passive voice. So now what is this past participle form? Let's see an example. Mohan sang a song for us. It becomes a song was sung by Mohan for us. So see, past participle form, sung. Okay. Example number 2 here. Preeti brought flowers for her. Flowers were brought for her by Preeti. Okay, so you can see how the tense also gets a little affected when you change the voice. Coming to the last rule here, rule number 5. In passive voice, a preposition is placed before the subject. So I told you to remember that we are writing by in most places. But this preposition could either be by, it could be to, it could also be with sometimes. But by is the preposition which is commonly used, most commonly used. The preposition by. It always comes before the subject when you change the subject, the sentence from active to passive. Okay, so this was rule number 5. Let's take a look at 2 examples for rule number 5. Water flooded the city. The city was flooded with water. So we're using with over here. Okay, Maumita baked delicious cake. Delicious cake was baked by Maumita. And we saw many other example sentences also with by, isn't it? So this is rule number 5. So we have done 5 rules here as far as changing of voice is concerned. Let's take a look quickly at the 5 rules without going too much into the examples. So voice change can happen only when a sentence contains a transitive or an action verb. We saw that according to rule number 2, the subject and the object of the sentence can change places. We can say they can swap places. Rule number 3 says personal pronouns change while converting a sentence from active to passive. And finally, we learned that each tense has their own specific rule for changing active voice to passive voice. But the bottom line is that all the tenses has to be in the past participle form when it is in the passive voice. And finally, we saw, just a second. Finally, we saw that in rule number 5, in passive voice, a preposition by, to or with, but usually by is placed before the subject. Okay, come on. Now let's move on and let's go to the next where we look at tenses and we try to see how the voice changes. So we have the present simple tense where I say, I play football. In passive it becomes, football is played by me. In the present continuous tense, he is buying a sports bike. So see, it will become a sports bike is being bought by him. Coming to the present perfect tense. She took his bike key. His bike key was taken by her. Coming to the past simple tense. He has driven a bike in the active becomes a bike has been driven by him. In the past continuous tense, I was singing a song becomes a song was being sung by me. Come to the past perfect tense. John hadn't come with Robin. Robin hadn't been come with John. Future simple tense or simple future tense. He will write a book. A book will be written by him. And future perfect tense, Andrew will have called his son. His son will have been called by Andrew. So this is a small chart. We can see how the tenses also bring about a change as far as voice is concerned. Okay, so this was about voices and about the types of voices and some more information about voices. Now we take a look at the paper patterns or the question patterns, and we will see that there are almost 7 patterns of questions which can be asked. Pattern 1 goes, choose the correct passive voice construction of the given sentence. Pattern 2 goes, choose the correct active voice construction of the given sentence. So when you have to choose the correct passive voice construction, a sentence, the question will be active voice. You have to decide which one is the correct passive voice. And vice versa. When you have to choose the correct active voice construction, the question will be in passive voice and you have to select which one will be the active voice. Then choose the 2 correct sentences in passive voice. So you have to make 2 choices over here. Okay. Then we have choose the incorrect sentences in passive voice. Then you have choose the correct pair of active voice and passive voice verbs. Pattern 6 says fill in the blanks with the correct option. Easy pattern. And finally, pattern 7 says choose the correct answer for the given question. So these are the 7 types of questions which can be asked of you based on the chapter voice. But now children, if you take a look at the time, we have taken up almost half an hour trying to understand what voice is. So now if we try and solve the question patterns also now, and considering that we have 7 types of questions to be done, then the lesson will become too long for you to hold your interest. Okay, so what we'll do is we will cut this video short here. I will come back next time and we will take a look at lots of examples based on the question patterns. Alright, in the meanwhile, watch the entire video and also try and do the tasks which I have set up for you. So children, now you have watched the video. So after you watch the video now, you will have to complete a few simple tasks. Now you might have watched the video on your computers or your laptops or your mobile phones. Now after you watch the video, what will you do? You will please go to the description box which is given below the video. So what is the description box? See, the description box looks like this. Alright, and after you go to the description box, you will see that there are a few questions there. Now what are these questions about? These questions are about the lesson that we just learned or the video that you just watched. So what will you do? You will think back properly about the lesson and you will try and answer these questions and note down the answers in your notebook if you want. Okay? After that, we have another task waiting. You will also click on the link which you will find in the description box to fill up the Google form. So now what is the Google form, children? It is nothing but a simple form. There are a few simple questions there about the video which you just saw and also about yourself. So, these are the tasks now that you will have to complete after you watch each video. So children, wasn't that a very interesting lesson? I'm sure you learnt a lot of new things in this lesson. If you have liked this video, please hit the like button and also subscribe to my video so that you will get to see all the videos which I keep posting regularly.